My name is Dale. I am 78. I have a name that once sounded confident in offices and workshops, but now only on hospital forms and bank envelopes. I live alone in a small house on the outskirts of Springfield, Illinois. This house was once filled with laughter, children's cries, and the smell of my late Susan's freshly baked apple pies. Now it is just the rustling of leaves outside the window and the creak of my knees as I rise from my chair. My children, Emily and Joshua, both live in cities, with careers, families, and plans of their own. They call me, well, when they remember. Emily sometimes sends me pictures of her grandchildren, Logan and Mia. But I haven't heard their voices in months. The last time Logan was with me, he spent the whole day on the phone. He didn't even look me in the eye when I told him about fishing trout with his dad in 1973. They're all busy. I get that. But somehow, every day I feel like I'm becoming invisible to them. I still wake up at 6 a.m. It's a habit. I used to go to work, 25 years in a shop where I designed parts for airplanes. Now, I pull up the curtains, make weak coffee, and look out the window. Sometimes my neighbor Mary, a young mother with a stroller, walks by. She doesn't say hello. I guess I'm as scared of her as she is of me. Recently, at a grocery store, a guy in his 20s put my bread next to the meat, and I politely reminded him that the bread should be separate. He grimaced and said, "Oh, seriously? They're just bags." And he tossed the rest of it away as if I were an empty space. I walk home slowly, with a stick. Sometimes people walk past me as if I were an obstacle. At bus stops, young people look right through me. I understand, I am a reminder of fragility, of old age, of what everyone is afraid of. In the hospital, they told me that my heart is under control, but you have to be careful. But how can you be careful when you are alone? When there is no one to even have a cup of tea with or tell a silly story about your youth? My voice seems to have become a shadow. Like me. I don't complain. It's just strange. You lived your whole life to end up becoming a silent silhouette that people pass by on the street. But sometimes, before going to bed, I remember another time. Another me. Other people. And my heart shrinks not from illness but from longing. And I just want someone to say again, "Thank you, Dad. I appreciate you." But I haven't heard such words in a long time. This is the beginning of my story. And, perhaps, it's time to tell it. I remember standing in a brand new suit in the doorway of the workshop where I was just starting my career in 1968. In my hands was a modest suitcase with drawings, and in my heart was an inexhaustible desire to change the world. I was young, strong, and full of self-belief. Even my boss, Mr. Grayson, said then, "Dale, you have talent. Go confidently." And I went. Years flew by in a job where every line on paper meant a bit of safety for the pilot, every formula meant flight accuracy. I designed parts for military aircraft. I was proud of it. My drawings became part of the aircraft that carried the honor of the country. I knew I was doing something important. And at home was a different life. Susan, my Sue. She was waiting for me with dinner, always in an apron with flowers, with a smile and Elvis songs coming from the kitchen. She was my safe haven. When Joshua was born, I held him in my arms and felt the whole world change. And when Emily was born, I cried. It was a happiness that cannot be expressed in words. I built a house for them myself. Every brick was Saturday's worked, every step was my care. I turned down a promotion in another city because I didn't want to pick up the kids from school. I turned down trips because Sue was sick. And I didn't regret it. I believed then, family is the most important thing. And if you give yourself completely, you will receive love in return. I was respected. In the workshop, they called me Mr. Dale, even young engineers turned to me for advice. I spoke at Joshua's school, helped with science projects, coached the baseball team when there was no coach. I was needed. And in the evenings, Sue and I would sit on the porch with a cup of coffee and listen to our children laugh. Sometimes I imagined how, many years later, they would return to this house with their children, and I, old but smiling, would meet them on the threshold. But time is a treacherous thing. It erases not only faces, but also voices. Sometimes it seems to me that those years were a dream. I wake up, and there is no one around. Only memories, like paintings hanging on the wall and fading with each passing day. Once I was a hero to my children. And now, it seems to them that it is easier when I am silent. When I do not call. When I do not remind them of myself. But I remember. And even if everyone has forgotten who I was, I have not forgotten. And while I still remember, I must tell my story to the end. One morning I tried to call Emily. I wanted to ask how Mia was doing at school. She answered after the third ring, her voice hurried, irritated. "Dad, I'm really busy right now. We're in a meeting. Can you text me?" And immediately hung up. Text me? To me? I can barely use the phone, and those little buttons are a real test for my fingers. And most of all, I didn't want to text. I wanted to hear her voice. A few days later I asked Joshua to come over and help with the boiler. I answered curtly, "Can you call a plumber? I'm at work." And I did. And I paid more out of my pension than I could afford. And one day I got myself together and went to a coffee shop downtown. I wanted to feel like I was among people for a bit. I sat by the window, ordered the coffee I used to drink with Sue. There were young girls sitting nearby. They were laughing, taking pictures, and one of them, turning to the other, said, "Oh, look how in the movie the old man drinks coffee himself." They didn't even understand what I heard. But I heard. And every word was like a nail in the chest. I don't go out often. But I had to go to the pharmacy. There was a line there. I waited in silence. When I reached the cashier said without a smile, "Your insurance policy is no longer active." I was confused. I stood there trying to find my card in my wallet, and someone behind me shouted, "Hurry up, Grandpa." It was a young man in a business suit. He didn't even look at me. And I, lowering my eyes, just left. I began to be afraid of people. Even on the bus, when I felt sick, no one offered me a seat. The children sitting nearby were listening to music and not even looking. I stood there, holding on to the railing, and in my mind I begged someone, anyone, to just see me. All my life I had been a pillar. And now I was a shadow. The pain wasn't just in my joints. The pain was in my heart. The feeling that I had become superfluous. That my voice was noise to those in a hurry to live. But I hadn't broken yet. Not yet. Because something inside me, like a fire, still smoldered. It happened on a Thursday. I remember the day because the mail arrives on Thursdays, and I used to wait for it like I used to wait for the newspapers, hoping for news that would change the day. I went out to get the letter, and on my way back to the door, I tripped over an old garden hose on the porch. Nothing new, my knees weren't the same anymore, but this time I fell hard. I was lying on my back, unable to get up. The sky was gray, and the wind was blowing hard, as if autumn wanted to tell me something. I felt my body ache, but the helplessness hurt more. Before, I could get up from any fall. And now, I was lying there like a bag of bones. 5 minutes, 10. No one passed by. Silence. I heard the wind blowing leaves, something tapping on the roof, a branch, I guess. And then, just when I was beginning to think that maybe I would just stay lying there, I heard a voice, "Sir, can I help you?" A young man of about 25 stood in front of me, with a backpack and headphones around his neck. He leaned forward, his eyes clear, honest, and full of concern. I nodded. He extended his hand, strong and warm. He lifted me up and set me down on the step. "Are you okay?" he asked. I think so. Thank you. What's your name, kid? Alex. I live on the next street. I see you sometimes when I pass by. We started talking. And I suddenly felt my heart, although tired, begin to come to life. Alex took his time, didn't fiddle with the phone in his hands. He listened. And when I told him about Susan, his face clouded over. It turned out his grandmother had died last spring. He said he regretted visiting her so rarely. We sat for almost an hour. There were letters lying around, I even forgot to pick them up. Alex promised to visit again. And indeed, a few days later he came with cookies. We drank tea on the veranda. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel alone. I was no longer just an old man, I was Dale again, a man with a story, with memories, with meaning. This incident stirred something in me. It was as if the dust that had settled over the years suddenly quivered at his touch. I remembered who I was. And I realized, all was not lost. The next morning I woke up with a strange inner shiver. Not the kind that comes from cold joints, and not from anxiety, it was something else. For the first time in a long time, I felt something waiting for me. It wasn't fear, and it wasn't anticipation. It was like an opportunity. I went to the closet I hadn't opened in years. It was in the pantry, next to an old toolbox and boxes of Logan's toys left over from his last visit. There, under some old sweaters, was a cardboard box. My whole life was in it. Old photos, yellowed letters, postcards from Susan, even the ones where she drew little hearts. Drawings from the studio. Papers from college. Even congratulatory letters from former colleagues. I put everything on the kitchen table and began to look around. Time seemed to dissolve. I saw my younger self, with a steady gaze and hands that hadn't yet trembled. I saw Emily holding my finger in the delivery room. Joshua laughingly dragging me along in the backyard. It wasn't just a memory. It was proof that I had lived. And then I decided, I was going to write my story. Not for publication, not for fame, but for them. For Logan, for Mia, for Alex. For anyone who hadn't forgotten that old age isn't the end. It's just another chapter. I reached out to Jim, my former colleague, whom I hadn't seen in 15 years. I called him and simply said, "Jim, I miss you. Can I talk?" We met in a coffee shop, hugged like two people who had been through a war and survived. He invited me to join the Engineering Veterans Club. I went. I sat among familiar faces, and every one of them looked at me not as an old man, but as Dale. Our Dale. In parallel, I started writing. Alex helped me with my laptop. He installed a simple typing program, showed me how to save files. And every evening I wrote. About how Sue and I met in the library. About the first time I held a drawing tool. How my son ran away from home for an hour because he wanted to be an astronaut. Every memory came to life, every sentence cleansed my soul. I shared a few pages with Alex. He read it and cried. He said that now he looked at his own grandfather differently. And then I realized, I was doing something important. Not only for myself. But for everyone who had forgotten that old age is also a voice. And this voice is worth listening to. I also started going to the park. Every Sunday. I just sat on a bench. And you know what? People started coming up to me. Someone asked for help with the phone, someone asked for directions. But most importantly, they looked me in the eye. Sometimes I even heard "good morning" from complete strangers. Life didn't change dramatically. But I did. I no longer woke up feeling empty. I lived with purpose. With hope. And with a story I wanted to leave behind. Because every life is worth hearing. And mine isn't over yet. It's been a few months since I fell on the porch and first met Alex. Since then, my house has been filled with voices again. Not as loud as before, not as constantly, but sincerely. And that's enough. I've finished the first part of my memoir. It covers my early years, meeting Susan, having children, my first successes at work. I wrote it without holding back tears, and I'm not ashamed of it. Because every tear is a memory that hasn't disappeared. Alex printed it all out, bound it, and gave it to me for Christmas, with the inscription, "For Dale, whose memory is my treasure." I sat with this book in my hands and thought, if I were gone tomorrow, I would still leave something behind. Something real. Emily came with the children for Easter. For the first time in years. Mia sat on my lap and asked, "Grandpa, were you happy when you were young?" And I said, "Yes. But you know, I'm happy now." She was surprised. And I explained, "Because you're here with me today." Joshua called the next day. He said he'd read my first few chapters. His voice was shaking. "Dad, I'm sorry I often kept quiet. But you've always been a hero to me. I didn't expect it. But that's exactly what I've wanted to hear all my life." And I heard it. I'm no longer afraid of loneliness. Because I realized that it doesn't come when you're alone. It comes when you stop being heard. And I have a voice again. And now I go out onto the porch not just to watch the sunset. I go out to breathe. To live. To hope that someone passing by will notice the old man with a book on his lap, and realize that he's not just Grandpa. Before him is a whole world of memories, experiences, pain and joy. I don't have the answers to all the questions. I don't know what tomorrow holds. But I know one thing, we all want to be important. Heard. Needed. And old age is no exception. This is not the time to say goodbye to life. This is the time to make sense of it. And if I could give one piece of advice to the younger generation, would say this: stop. Look your grandparents in the eyes. Ask them something. Anything. And listen. Because in their stories are your roots. And without roots, a tree falls. I am Dale. And I lived. And I still live. And as long as my heart beats, I will tell.
Subscribe and like, and share this video with your friends.